Kamsi was a beautiful girl, full of life and laughter. She lived with her parents in a peaceful village in Anambra State. Though she wasn't born blind, she could still remember the colors of the world before darkness took over her eyes. It started with an illness, a fever that burned through her body like fire. She had woken up one morning, and the world had turned into shadows. No light, no colors, just an endless void. She screamed for her mother, and her father held her tight, whispering that everything would be fine. But it wasn't fine. Her parents loved her fiercely, refusing to let her blindness define her. Her father, a farmer, would take her to the fields, describing the beauty of the land. Her mother, a trader, would bring back colorful fabrics and let her feel them, explaining the colors she could no longer see. Then the sickness came. First, it took her mother. Kamsi could hear her coughing at night, could feel the heat from her body as she lay beside her, whispering prayers to the heavens. One morning, her mother didn't wake up. Kamsi knew, even before her father shook her mother's lifeless body, crying out in despair. Her father tried to be strong, but grief weighed him down. He barely ate, barely spoke. And then, just weeks later, he too was gone. At the funeral, Kamsi sat motionless, her small hands clutching the hem of her dress. She could hear the murmurs, the pitying voices, the whispers of what would become of her. Then came Uncle Edwin, her father's younger brother, who arrived from the city of Port Harcourt. He held Kamsi's hand and told her she would come with him. Port Harcourt was different, loud, fast, overwhelming. Uncle Edwin's house was big, with smooth tiles that felt cold under her feet. His wife, Angela, and their daughter, Talia, were not pleased to have her. At first, they masked it with false kindness, but soon, their true colors showed. Kamsi became their servant. Even though she was blind, she was made to scrub floors, wash clothes, cook meals, and do everything in the house. If she made a mistake, the punishments were severe. Talia mocked her constantly, laughing when she stumbled, hiding things from her, making her life a living nightmare. Mrs. Angela was worse. She called Kamsi a witch, blaming her for her parents' deaths, treating her like filth. One evening, Kamsi, weak and exhausted, forgot to dispose of her used sanitary pad. When Mrs. Angela found it, rage filled her voice. She and Talia cornered Kamsi, forcing her to do the unthinkable. "Eat it," Angela commanded, her voice dripping with wickedness. Kamsi sobbed, begging, but the more she cried, the more they laughed. They watched as she, in complete horror, obeyed, her stomach twisting in pain and shame. Afterward, she curled up on the cold floor, trembling, humiliated, broken. Days later, she fell ill. Fever gripped her body, her stomach churned in unbearable pain. She wanted to tell Uncle Edwin, but Angela's threat rang in her ears: "If you open your mouth, you'll go back to that village to die alone." That night, as she served Uncle Edwin his dinner, he noticed the change in her. "Kamsi, are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. She forced a smile and nodded. But Uncle Edwin wasn't convinced. He stormed into the bedroom. "Angela, what have you done to Kamsi, our daughter?" Angela scoffed. "That witch that killed her parents is not my daughter. I only have one child, Talia." Fury burned in Edwin's chest. "I warned you, Angela. If anything happens to Kamsi, I swear you won't like me." The next morning, Uncle Edwin called the family doctor. When the doctor arrived and examined Kamsi, his face turned grave. "This is too bad," he murmured. "She needs to come with me immediately." Kamsi felt weak as she was carried into the hospital. The air smelled different, clean, sharp, filled with something she couldn't quite place. The doctor laid her on a bed and asked her a series of questions, but her voice was too weak to respond properly. Uncle Edwin stood beside her, his large hand gripping hers gently. "Doctor, please, tell me the truth. What is wrong with her?" The doctor hesitated. "She has a severe infection. It's spreading fast, and if we don't act now, we may lose her." Edwin's breath caught. "Lose her? No, do whatever it takes to save her." Kamsi, half conscious, could hear their voices but felt distant, as if floating between two worlds. Memories of her parents flashed through her mind, her mother's laughter, her father's strong arms lifting her high in the air. Was she going to join them? Angela and Talia remained at home, unconcerned. "She's just pretending," Talia scoffed, painting her nails. "That blind rat always seeks attention." Angela chuckled. "Let's see how long she lasts." But fate had other plans. Uncle Edwin made sure Kamsi got the best care. Days passed, and slowly, she regained her strength. With each passing moment, anger grew in Edwin's heart. He had ignored the signs for too long. Now, he would make things right. One evening, when Kamsi was strong enough to sit up, Edwin sat beside her. "Kamsi, I need you to tell me everything," he said softly. "No matter what, I will protect you." Tears welled in Kamsi's blind eyes. This was her moment. She took a deep breath and, for the first time, let out all the pain, all the suffering. Edwin listened, and with each word, his hands clenched into fists. By the time she finished, his voice was cold and firm. "I promise you, Kamsi, they will never hurt you again." The day blind Kamsi was to be discharged from the hospital, Dr. Larry summoned Mr. Edwin to his office. The doctor's expression was calm but firm as he spoke. "Mr. Edwin, I want my younger brother, Henry, who resides in Dubai, to marry Kamsi." Mr. Edwin furrowed his brows in surprise. "But, she is blind. I hope you're not saying this out of pity." Dr. Larry shook his head. "Not at all. I mean it. My brother has been searching for a wife, and Kamsi is exactly the kind of woman he would want to marry." Mr. Edwin felt a mix of emotions stir within him: shock, curiosity, and a hint of excitement. But he kept his feelings hidden, his face unreadable. "Well, Dr. Larry, I've heard what you said," he responded carefully. "But I am not the one getting married. Kamsi is my niece, and this is her decision. Let Henry return to Nigeria and meet her first. If they both agree to the marriage, who am I to object?" Dr. Larry nodded in understanding. And with that, the conversation ended. That evening, Kamsi was discharged from the hospital. Mr. Edwin drove her home in silence, occasionally glancing at his niece, who sat beside him with an air of quiet dignity. When they arrived, he parked the car, then got out to help her. She stepped down carefully, gripping her walking stick, her face unreadable but graceful in its own way. He led her inside, guiding her straight to her room before stepping out. In the living room, his wife and daughter sat in cold silence. His daughter hesitated before greeting him weakly, but his wife simply sighed and disappeared into their bedroom without a word. Mr. Edwin exhaled, shaking his head. It was just another reminder of the strained atmosphere in his home. With a tired sigh, he followed suit, stepping into his own room, his thoughts lingering on Dr. Larry's proposal. Would Kamsi ever agree to such a thing? And more importantly, what would Henry think when he finally met her? That night, Kamsi lay on her bed, exhausted but relieved to be out of the hospital. Her body still ached, and her mind replayed everything that had happened in the past few weeks. She knew her uncle cared for her, but his wife and daughter made life unbearable. Meanwhile, Mr. Edwin sat on the edge of his bed, lost in thought. The doctor's proposal kept replaying in his mind. Could Henry truly want to marry Kamsi? Would Kamsi agree to such a thing? He decided not to say anything to her yet, at least not until Henry returned. The next morning, Kamsi woke up early, feeling a little stronger. She moved carefully to the kitchen, her hands tracing along the walls for guidance. She had learned how to navigate the house despite her blindness, but that didn't stop Angela and Talia from making things harder for her. "Why are you walking like an old woman?" Talia mocked as she sipped her tea. Kamsi ignored her and continued feeling around for the kettle. She had barely started making breakfast when Angela walked in. "Who told you to touch anything in my kitchen?" Angela barked. "I just wanted to make tea," Kamsi said softly. Angela snatched the cup from her hand and poured the tea into the sink. "Did I not warn you? You will only eat when I give you food," she snapped. Kamsi bit her lip, holding back tears. She was tired of the cruelty but had nowhere else to go. Later that evening, Mr. Edwin received a call from Henry. "Good evening, sir. My brother Dr. Larry gave me your number. I'm Henry. I'll be in Nigeria next week," Henry said. Edwin sighed. A part of him was nervous, but he was also hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, Something good was finally going to happen to Kamsi. That week felt like the longest for Kamsi. She could feel the tension in the house. Her uncle had been unusually quiet, and she could tell he was thinking about something important. Angela and Talia, on the other hand, continued treating her with the same cruelty. One evening, as she sat alone in her room, her uncle knocked and stepped inside. "Kamsi, I need to talk to you," he said gently. She sat up immediately. "Is everything okay, uncle?" He hesitated, then sighed. "There's something I need to tell you. A few days ago, Dr. Larry mentioned something to me. He has a younger brother, Henry, who has been searching for a wife. He believes you are the kind of woman Henry would want to marry." Kamsi's heart skipped a beat. "Me?" she whispered. "Yes, but listen, no one is forcing you. Henry will be arriving in Nigeria next week. I want you to meet him first and decide for yourself. If you don't want to, I won't pressure you." Kamsi felt a mix of emotions. She was blind, why would anyone want to marry her? Was this out of pity? Or was it truly something genuine? "But uncle, I don't even know him," she said, her voice shaking. "I understand," Edwin said. "Take your time. Just meet him first." Kamsi nodded slowly. "Okay." The next few days, Angela and Talia grew more suspicious. Edwin had not told them about Henry's visit, but they could sense something was going on. One evening, Angela cornered Edwin in their bedroom. "What are you planning, Edwin?" she asked sharply. "Nothing that concerns you," he replied. Angela scoffed. "It's about that blind witch, isn't it? Why do you care so much about her? Are you planning to give her to one of your rich friends?" Edwin turned to face her, his patience wearing thin. "Angela, listen to me. If you don't change your ways, you will regret it. I will not allow you to keep treating Kamsi like a slave in this house." Angela folded her arms and smirked. "Do whatever you want. But just know, she will never find happiness in this house." The next day, Henry arrived in Nigeria.